Back to one of our lead stories tonight. Smaller political parties are rejecting the introduction of a minimum threshold in the composition of executives in coalition governments. The ATM Good Party IFP, Al-Jama, ACDP and Freedom Front Plus have accused the ANC and the DA of forming partnerships to block out smaller parties. South Africa's top two political formations want this threshold to be introduced and the Municipal Structures Act amended in order to prevent smaller parties from dictating to them in hung councils. We're now joined by political analyst Professor Susan Booysen, who joins us via our Zoom link. Susan, thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Of course, we saw the dialogue taking place today. Of course, we understand that this is to create some sort of stability in our municipalities. But, you know, one would say that when you look at what transpired today, there is some sort of an attempt, to strip off smaller parties from their power. What do you make of what took place today?
Good evening. Yes, it was a very interesting balance between the different party political interests and strategy of the ANC and to some extent the DA vis-a-vis the smaller parties. That was very tangible throughout the deliberations. Of course, first, a very big standout for me was the controversy around what we call Principle 6. That is a principle that we also saw in the ANC presentations at today's deliberations, namely that the party that is biggest, that emerges in an election, whether that is an outright majority or not, in this case now not a majority, that party should take the lead. We had initially seen that was also in the Deputy Presidency's approach to this meeting, in the principles that were put forward beforehand. And then Paul Mashatile, Deputy President, silently dropped it from his presentation this morning. But that certainly did feature again in the ANC's one. And this is important because it relates to the ANC's relation with the small political parties. It could very well be that the ANC still needs these small parties to top up should it come into a majority, or opposition parties, if they get into situations where they could constitute a majority. Those small parties will be very important. And actually, those parties have become a huge part of South Africa's political culture for at least the last 5 years now, and they've grown in influence through local government coalitions in the last few years. So they are very important. What is emerging out of these deliberations here, and there has been very little chance for opposition parties to debate yet, but what has emerged is that there is a massive amount of consensus of their big role. But I think there's a question of containing that disproportionate role that the small parties play in these deliberations. And the small parties will probably accept that. And that goes hand in hand then with the question of a threshold and what that threshold should be. We have a natural threshold to hold of 0.25%, a quarter of percentage point, then parties can get into parliament. Sometimes in other institutions too, like municipal, a little smaller. So there is that. Is a question whether that should be taken upward or not. And because there has been so much misappropriation of that kind of position by the small parties, but especially by the big parties as well. If it had not been for the ANC and DA that had been creating many opportunities for these small parties, the small parties would not have been able to exercise disproportionate influence. So they're both reality checks, but a certain measure of consensus also emerging that more regulation is necessary. And of course, the big point in this debate today is what is the extent of regulation that is required? Should opposition politics and coalition politics be allowed, as is done in many other localities around the world, to emerge naturally and have more periods of turmoil now? Or should there be an incisive step to control it and even institute a regulatory body?
We also saw coming out from, the presentations being done today was indeed what Bantu Holomisa said, and that startling revelation saying that there is already a draft bill that has already been done, and that being confirmed by the Deputy President for COCTA. Do you think that this dialogue is being done in good faith? If there's already a draft bill already on the cards before people have made or parties have made their presentations to this dialogue?
Yes, that is a very tricky question, and it is being confirmed there is a draft bill. We don't know the exact details as to exactly how far it does go, what exact measures have been included in this or not in this bill. And so that there will be a lot of proof for the ANC to do that this is in good faith. We know that the ANC is probably also using this event as a major measure to see that more consensus emerges around the issues that they want to take forward. And because there's such a popular outcry too about the unruliness of coalitions, there's a lot of pressure on the ANC to show that it is doing something. And should it come into a position of being forced to have a coalition at the national level or some provincial levels next year, that they can count on more of a fallback on, but there was consensus on certain issues. Yes, but we'll have to see. It will be very interesting to see how they actually marry this and this total event in their final deliberations as to with the already existing draft legislation.
Prof, would you say that, the issue of Big Brother politics seems to be coming to the fore in these discussions? Because, we've seen the ANC's proposal saying that even though you don't get an outright majority, but if you have the majority of those numbers, then you should be allowed, to run, be it a municipality or a province. Will this Big Brother politics or, haunt coalitions going into the future?
I think it could. It could. It's certainly a case that the ANC is trying to take out insurance for itself. Should it, for example, at national level, maybe also some provincial levels, some of the provinces come out below 50%, and that means it would have the trajectory, a very smooth, easy one for itself back into power if it had managed to persuade the parties to agree to, yes, the biggest party must take the lead. But that is quite a clear effort to do that, to play that kind of politics, and that is quite disingenuous. And the small parties, if not all other parties except the ANC, will probably be reacting to it. But there could also be a few small parties like Al Jamaa, which is very keen to pronounce its support for the ANC as part of a broader so-called for liberation movement front. That will, in the words of Al Jamaa, be certain to have the majorities in future. So the ANC will be able to count on the support of that kind of a band of small parties, as IGA also counts on a band of its own small allegiant parties. But it is Big Brother politics, and it is the ANC definitely trying to also use this forum to ensure that it could have that not a back door open, actually a front door open, if it should fall short of an outright 50% majority come next year's elections.
And staying with the ANC, Prof, do you think that the fact that the ANC government is holding this dialogue, it's an admission from itself that it may not get that 50 plus majority come the 2024 elections?
It's certainly an option that the ANC is very aware of, and in a way it is also a reaction to popular outcry against the chaos that there has been in some localities, not all localities of coalition government, but in some of the localities, and a demand that something should be done about it, and government is of course in an ideal position to do something about it. But there is no doubt that the ANC is trying to smooth that trajectory for itself back into power should it fall short of 50% majority, and do this by way of a national consensus that may be taken forward out of these 2 days deliberations.
Okay, I know, Professor, we also know that tomorrow is indeed the last day. What are your expectations from this dialogue when it closes tomorrow?
Well, we can already see, although a few of the important sessions still remain, but it is a clear focus on the regulation aspect. That seems to be the most popular one, quite obviously, among the political parties. They want to see what proposals are and what kind of consensus emerges. We see already in the closing moments of today's deliberations, there is an overemphasis on the level of consensus, people being reassured there's so much on which we agree. There is a rising level of consensus. There's much more awareness. There's consensus, for example, in possibly containing the number of motions of no confidence, in ensuring there is some separation between administration and politicians, so that there are fewer opportunities for profitable portfolios being allocated, etc. There's some consensus emerging on that, and I think that there will really be capitalization on and perhaps even overextension or overrepresentation of the level of consensus that is emerging. Okay. But I'm pretty sure there will be an announcement at the end that there is a consensus on taking forward this framework.
Professor, thank you so much for your contributions. That is Professor Susan Booysen, a political analyst, talking about that coalition dialogue which was taking place today in Cape Town.